The shuttle's proximity alarm went off 4 minutes before anyone bothered to look at it. "That's new," Tam Ruiz said, not taking her hands off the yoke. Priya Ose looked up from her tablet, where she'd been formatting a closure report for a mission that hadn't technically started yet. Define new. Structured heat signatures, ground level, geometric. Ruiz tapped the display twice like it might change its mind if she was firm enough with it. Dead worlds don't have geometry, Priya. Dead worlds have rocks. Rocks are round. This is not round. In the seat behind them, Dorian Kessel closed his eyes and pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose, the universal gesture of a man doing legal math. Define geometric. I don't know, Dorian. I'm not a geometrician. I'm a pilot who was told this planet has been empty since a corpse stopped rotting on it 10 years ago. It's not a corpse, Kessel said. It's an unresolved asset. It's a baby, Osai said without looking up. It was a baby, Kessel corrected, gently, the way a man corrects a typo in a contract worth more than a small country. Currently, it is an unresolved asset pending confirmation of biological cessation, which is the only reason the three of us are on this shuttle instead of enjoying our Tuesday like normal people. The shuttle bucked as it hit Kharn's upper atmosphere, and for a moment nobody said anything, because the ride down a gravity well tends to remind even the most committed bureaucrat that they are, briefly, a fragile bag of liquid falling very fast toward something solid. Osai watched the heat signatures resolve on her own screen as the altitude ticked down. Ruiz was right. They weren't natural. They had corners. She didn't say anything about that yet. She'd learned, in 6 years of corporate audit work, that the moment you said something alarming out loud, it became everyone's problem to manage instead of a fact anyone had to act on. Better to sit with it a little longer. Better to look at the shape of the thing before you gave it a name. The shape this time was a ring. A near-perfect ring of heat blooms arranged around a central point, roughly 2 kilometers wide, sitting in a jungle clearing that, according to the 10-year-old survey data still loaded in the shuttle's nav computer, should have been empty scrub and ash. Ledger 7 to Thornville Holdings, Ruiz said into the comm, flat and procedural. On approach, requesting anyone still awake back home to confirm there isn't supposed to be a settlement down here. Silence, then faint under static, confirmed no settlement, confirmed no personnel, confirmed no activity of any kind post-placement. You are cleared to proceed with visual confirmation and sample retrieval. Copy, Ruiz said, and then off-comm to the cabin. Sample retrieval. They want us to bag bones like it's an Easter egg hunt. It's a legal term, Kessel said. It's a skull, Dorian. It's an asterisk asset resolution requiring physical evidence of terminal status, Kessel said, reciting it the way he'd recited it in 4 separate briefings, each time a little faster, like saying it quickly enough might stop it meaning what it meant. Once we confirm, the inheritance dispute closes, the shares transfer, and everyone goes back to their lives. That's it. That's the whole job. Cool, Ruiz said. Cool, cool, cool. And if the geometric heat signatures turn out to be, I don't know, a asterisk structure? Nobody answered that. The shuttle came down in a clearing choked with ash-pale trees, their bark scorched smooth as bone, and the engines kicked up a storm of gray dust that took almost a full minute to settle. When it did, the silence that followed was the kind that had weight to it. Ose had been on quiet worlds before corporate audits took her to some genuinely lifeless rocks, but this wasn't the silence of nothing living. This was the silence of something listening. She stepped down the ramp first, because that was her job, and immediately understood why the survey drones a decade ago had reported this world as a write-off. The air was thin and bitter, faintly metallic, like sucking on a coin. The trees didn't move even though there was wind. Their branches were too rigid, fused by something that had scarred them long ago and never let them heal soft again. And everywhere she noticed this before she let herself think about it, the ground was asterisk clean asterisk. No underbrush, no scattered debris. A jungle floor swept as bare as a corridor. "Somebody's been gardening," Ruiz muttered, coming down behind her, rifle low but ready. Kessel came last, tablet already up, narrating for the record in the particular tone of a man who wanted every word of this trip to survive a future deposition intact. "Team has landed. Environmental conditions consistent with prior survey data, atmosphere breathable, temperature." "Dorian." Osa had crouched at the tree line where the swept ground gave way to something deliberately placed. A small cairn of pale stones, no taller than her knee, stacked with a precision that made her stomach do something unpleasant. 6 stones, even spacing. A 7th balanced flat on top like a lid. "That's not natural," Ruiz said. "No," Osa agreed. There were more of them. Once she started looking, she found she couldn't stop finding them. Cairns at regular intervals, following the swept path deeper into the ring of heat signatures, spaced with the kind of consistency that suggested someone had measured the distance, not eyeballed it. She counted 11 before she made herself stop counting and started walking again. Tablet held loose in one hand, professional instinct fighting with something older and less professional that was telling her, very clearly, to get back on the shuttle. They found the drums before they found anything else. It wasn't loud. It was distant, rhythmic, low enough to feel more than hear. A pulse coming from somewhere past the tree line. 3 beats and a pause, 3 beats and a pause, patient as a heartbeat. Ruiz froze mid-step, rifle coming up an inch. "Tell me that's geological," she said. "It's not geological," Osai said. The drumming stopped. It stopped the exact moment the shuttle's engine ticks, cooling behind them, finally went silent, as if whatever was making that sound had been waiting to hear the machine go quiet before it did the same. Nobody moved for a long 5 seconds. Kessel's tablet, Osai noticed, had stopped narrating. "Okay," Ruiz said very softly. New plan. New plan is we grab whatever's easiest to grab and we leave." "We can't leave without confirmation," Kessel said, but his voice had lost its boardroom polish. It came out thinner than he probably wanted it to. They pushed on, because that was the job, because somewhere on the other side of a black hole of paperwork was a payday large enough to make 3 reasonable adults walk deeper into a jungle that had just demonstrated it could hear them coming. Os found the manifest tag half buried in a drift of gray ash maybe 200 meters further in, and she almost missed it. A thin strip of corroded alloy, the kind bolted to cargo crates, edges eaten soft by a decade of weather. She brushed the ash off with her thumb, and the embossed lettering caught the light. Thornvle Expedition Subject, MADAIR Age, 11 months Disposition, Placement. She read it twice. She didn't say anything. She held it out to Kessel instead, because some findings deserved to be handed over rather than spoken. Kessel looked at it for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes that Osai had never seen on him before, not guilt, exactly. Recognition. The specific stillness of a man realizing he was standing inside a decision he had once initialed in a conference room, 3 floors above street level, with good coffee and better lighting. "I reviewed that placement order," he said finally, quietly to no one. "I remember reviewing it. It came through as a resettlement authorization, standard language. I didn't," he stopped, started again. "It said relocation to a low-risk biosphere pending guardianship review asterisk." "Dorian," Ruiz said, "does this look low-risk to you?" He didn't answer that either. They were still standing there, the 3 of them, in the kind of silence that comes right before someone says something they can't unsay, when the trees at the edge of the clearing simply parted. Not rustled, not shook. Parted the way a curtain parts for someone who already knows exactly where the opening is, and something stepped through that made Ruiz's rifle come all the way up before her brain had finished processing what she was looking at. It was tall, taller than the shuttle's cargo door. easily, and built like something that had never once in its evolutionary history needed to apologize for existing. Chitin plating the color of old bone ran in overlapping segments down a body that moved on 4 load-bearing limbs and carried 2 more, shorter, clawed, tucked close against its chest like a mantis holding a secret. Its head was a narrow wedge, no visible eyes that Osai could find, just a series of dark slits along the front edge that seemed, somehow, to be pointed directly at her. Nobody breathed. The creature didn't charge. It didn't screech, didn't posture, didn't do any of the things Osai's adrenaline-flooded brain had been braced for since the moment she'd seen it. It simply stood there at the tree line, utterly silent, and looked, if that word even applied to a thing without eyes, for 4 long seconds. Then it turned, unhurried, almost bored, and dragged one foreclaw down the trunk of the nearest tree, gouging a long, pale scar into the bark. A mark. Deliberate. Placed. And then it withdrew back into the tree line as quietly as it had come, the branches falling closed behind it like nothing had happened at all. That, Ruiz said, into the ringing silence that followed, was not the confirmation I was hopping to bag today. It marked the tree, Osai said. She was still staring at the scar in the bark, at the strange evenness of the gouge, 4 parallel lines spaced like they meant something. It didn't attack. It marked the tree and left. Something's hurting us, Ruiz said. That's not a threat display, that's a boundary. Somebody's telling us where the fence is. Kessel, to his credit, had already started walking, tablet forgotten at his side, following the swept-clean path deeper into the clearing without waiting for either of them. Like a man who had suddenly decided, he needed the answer more than he needed his own safety. And Osai and Ruiz exchanged one look. The look of 2 people agreeing, without words, that whatever was about to happen was already happening, and there was no version of this mission where they got to leave without seeing it, before they followed him. The trees thinned another 100 meters on, and what lay beyond them stopped all 3 of them cold. It wasn't a grave. Graves didn't have walls. Rising out of the ash-pale jungle floor was a perimeter of scavenged shuttle plating, riveted and lashed, and in places welded into a rough, deliberate curve. A decade of patchwork armor bent around a structure that had clearly grown outward in stages, cruder metal at the base giving way to cleaner, more confident joins the higher it rose. It wasn't a monument to a dead child. It was a fortress, built by someone who had survived long enough to get good at building fortresses, and it had been waiting for them the entire time. Somewhere behind that wall, the drums started again. 3 beats, a pause. Closer this time. The wall had a door. That was the part that undid Kessel first, not the height of it, not the drums, but the fact that someone had bothered to hang a door, hinged and balanced, on a fortress in the middle of a death world. It swings, Ruiz said, staring at it like it had personally offended her. Somebody engineered a swinging door out of a bulkhead panel, on a planet with no other humans on it. Maybe there are other humans on it, Osai said quietly, and nobody had an answer for that, so nobody offered one. The door wasn't locked. It didn't need to be. Nothing here needed to be locked against the 3 of them, and the thought of what that implied, that they weren't a threat worth locking a door against, that they were being asterisk aloud and sat cold in Osai's chest, as Ruiz eased it open with the muzzle of her rifle, and the hinges gave a low, well-oiled sigh instead of a horror movie shriek. Inside was worse than outside, in the specific way that order is always worse than chaos when you're braced for the opposite. The compound wasn't large, maybe 40 meters across, ringed by that same patchwork wall, but it was organized with an intensity that made Osai's audit instincts itch. Paths of packed ash, swept daily by the look of them, ran between structures built in distinct architectural eras. A lean-to of scorched branches near the wall, clearly the oldest, its lashings gone brittle and gray. Beside it, a sturdier frame of bent alloy, mid-period, patched twice. And dominating the center, a squat, confident structure of riveted shuttle plate with a proper roof pitch, rain channels, even a crude but functional chimney venting a thin thread of smoke into the bruised sky. Tree rings, Osai thought. You could read this place like tree rings if you knew how to look, and she did, because reading how something had gotten from nothing to this was, in a sick way, exactly her job. There, Kessel said, and pointed his tablet's light at the nearest wall, the inside of the perimeter, not the compound structures, where a long panel of pale wood, salvaged from one of the ash trees and sanded smooth, had been mounted at eye height like a display. It was covered in tally marks. Not scratched in wildly, not the frantic hash marks of a man counting down days in a cell. These were carved with care, grouped in clean sets of 5, running in tight, even rows across the entire panel and onto a second panel beside it and a third beginning below that. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Prisoner counts his days, Ruiz said, but she didn't sound like she believed it even as she said it. 10 years is 3,600 and change. This is more than that. It's not days, Osai said. She'd stepped closer, tablet up, and something about the spacing had started nagging at her, the way a misfiled invoice nags at you before you consciously know why. Look at the groupings. They're not uniform intervals. Some clusters are dense, some are sparse. There's asterisk gaps asterisk. Days don't have gaps. Days just keep happening. So what is it counting? Osai didn't answer that yet, because she'd noticed something else, off to the side of the tally wall, half hidden behind the newest of the 3 structures. A child's blanket, or what had once been one, corporate tissue synth fiber in a shade of blue that Thornville Holdings had used exclusively for infant transport kits a decade ago. It had been shredded, not torn in panic, but cut deliberately into long, even strips, and those strips braided and rebraided into a length of rope thick as her wrist, coiled neatly on a hook by the door. He made cordage out of his own blanket, she said, and her voice came out smaller than she meant it to. Kessel had gone, very still beside her. He was looking at something on the ground near the oldest lean-to, a scatter of small, sun-bleached objects that at first glance she'd taken for pebbles, and then, when she crouched to look properly, resolved into something far worse. The fragments of a corporate tissue infant comfort toy, the kind Thornville gave every relocated dependent, a soft plastic shell that had clearly been cracked open years ago and repurposed. Its internal weights and springs stripped out and refashioned. She could see the marks, into crude fishhooks, and a small mechanism that might once have been a snare trigger. Beside the fragments, pressed into a patch of long-dried mud that had somehow never been walked over since, were 2 sets of prints. One small, a child's hand splayed, the fingers barely longer than Osai's own thumb. The other larger, clawed, 4-toed, pressed down right beside it, close enough that the edges of the 2 prints touched. Nobody made a joke about that. Even Ruiz, who'd had something dry and defensive ready in her mouth since the shuttle door opened, just looked at the 2 prints pressed side by side in mud that had been dry for the better part of a decade, and said nothing at all. He wasn't hiding from them, Osa said finally. Whatever's out there, he wasn't hiding from them, he was. She stopped because she didn't have a word that fit, and the closest one she had felt obscene to say out loud in a place like this. Raised. He grew up here with them. That's not survivable, Kessel said, but it came out as a plea more than a fact, the sentence of a man trying to negotiate reality down to something his liability training had prepared him for. Neither was landing a shuttle full of live goats into predator territory as a humane resettlement asterisk, Ruiz said, and for once Kessel didn't correct her terminology. They moved deeper into the compound, past the mid-period structure, and Osai found herself doing the thing she always did on an audit without meaning to. Cataloging, dating, building a timeline out of physical evidence because that was the only language she trusted. The oldest Linta had crude notches on its support poles, evenly spaced, that she was increasingly sure were height markings. A child measuring himself against a wall the way children did everywhere, except this child had no parent to hold the pencil, no doorframe in a kitchen. Just a burnt tree trunk and a knife and the patience to keep doing it. The marks climbed steadily for the first several years and then, near the top, jumped a long gap between the second-to-last and last notch, as if whatever growth spurt had happened fast and late and alone. Priya, Kessel's voice had changed. She turned and found him standing at the tally wall again, but he wasn't looking at the pattern anymore. He was looking at his own tablet, held up beside the carved panel, and his face had gone the color of the ash outside. What? I cross-referenced the date clusters. He turned the tablet toward her, and she saw what he'd done, pulled the cached corporate records still loaded from before they'd lost signal on descent. Thornville Holdings' internal calendar, board minutes, meeting logs going back a decade, all of it archived locally because that was standard travel protocol for a legal witness. The dense clusters, the gaps, I thought it was random. It's not random. He tapped the screen, and a second set of dates scrolled up alongside the tally groupings, and Osai felt the floor of the whole situation drop out from under her before her conscious mind had even finished the comparison, because the pattern was right there, ugly and undeniable. The dense clusters of carved marks lined up, almost date for date, with quarterly board meetings. The sparse gaps matched the long stretches between them. Someone, something, out here in a jungle with no satellites, no network, no possible way of knowing what was happening in a boardroom 4 light-years away, had been marking a corporate meeting schedule for 10 straight years. That's not a survival calendar, Kessel said, and his voice had gone very quiet, very flat, the voice of a man reading his own obituary in someone else's handwriting. He's not counting days he survived. He's counting asterisk us asterisk, Osai said. He's been tracking the company this whole time. He knows when you people meet. That's not possible, Kessel said, except it clearly was, because the evidence was carved into a wall in front of them in neat, patient rows, and the only remaining question, the one that made the thin metallic air of the compound suddenly feel a great deal thinner, was asterisk how. Ruiz answered it for all of them, in a voice pitched low, her rifle already swinging back toward the door they'd come in through. Guys. They turned, standing at the tree line just beyond the broken perimeter wall, not advancing, not retreating, simply asterisk present in the way it had been present before, was the bone strider from the clearing, or one very like it. Osai couldn't tell. They all wore the same bone-pale plating, the same eyeless wedge of a head. Except this time it wasn't leaving a mark and withdrawing. This time it wasn't alone. Osai counted 2 more shapes further back among the trees, patient, motionless, watching, and this time none of them turned to go. It's not hurting us anymore, Ruiz said, backing a slow step toward the compound's central structure rather than the door, because the door, she'd apparently decided in half a second of tactical math, was now the wrong direction. It's containing us. The drums had stopped again. In the new silence from somewhere inside the central structure, the newest, sturdiest building at the heart of the compound, the one with the chimney and the proper roof and 10 years of accumulated competence behind every joint of its construction. A bolt slid back, unhurried, metal on well-maintained metal, and the door began, very slowly, to open from the inside. The door didn't swing open so much as asterisk offer itself, easing back on hinges that had clearly been oiled more recently than the ones at the perimeter wall, and for 3 full seconds nothing came through it at all. Just dark. Just the faint smell of wood smoke and something else underneath it, something clean and mineral, like the inside of a place that had been scrubbed rather than merely lived in. Then he stepped out, and Osai's first thought, the thought that arrived before fear, before professional instinct, before anything useful at all, was that he looked asterisk tired in the specific way of someone who had been expecting this exact conversation for years, and had simply been waiting for the paperwork to catch up. He was tall. Not Bone Strider tall, but tall in the way Kharn's gravity, and a decade of hard use built a body, lean muscle laid over a frame that had clearly grown up being asked to do things human bodies weren't designed to do and had simply complied. His clothes were scavenged and repurposed with the same obsessive competence as everything else in the compound. A flight jacket, decades out of style, restitched at the seams with what looked like sinew, boots built from cargo webbing and chitin plate. His hair was dark, cut short and even not wild, not matted. Someone at some point had figured out how to give himself a haircut with a knife and had kept doing it. He looked, Osai thought with a lurch of vertigo, like a man who'd walked out of a boardroom and gotten spectacularly lost on the way to the elevator. Except the lost had lasted 10 years, and the elevator had never been coming. Priya Osai, he said before anyone had said a word. Senior Audit Associate, Thornville Holdings Compliance Division. 7 years with the firm, 4 in your current role. His eyes very calm, very level, a shade of gray-green that didn't belong on this ash-colored planet, moved to Ruiz. Tamsin Ruiz. Ex-Colonial Logistics Command, contracted pilot, this is your 11th corporate escort job in 3 years. And then to Kessel, and something in his voice changed here, sharpened by a fraction of a degree that made the temperature of the whole clearing seem to drop. Dorian Kessel, Legal Counsel, Placement and Resettlement Division. You reviewed my file personally on the 14th of March, 10 years and 4 months ago. You signed off in 11 minutes. Nobody spoke. Ruiz's rifle had drifted a few degrees off target, not from carelessness, but from the specific paralysis of a soldier confronted with an enemy who already had the whole engagement mapped before the first shot. How? Kessel managed. And it wasn't really a question, more a sound a person makes when their throat needs somewhere to put the pressure. You get very good at listening when you have nothing else to do for 10 years. Marcus. Because it had to be Marcus. There was no other name this could belong to, tilted his head, a gesture that landed somewhere between human curiosity and something else, something borrowed from the creatures that flanked him now as he stepped fully out into the daylight. 2 more bone striders emerging from the tree line to either side of the doorway like an honor guard nobody had asked for. Corporate shuttles aren't as encrypted as you think, especially not after the 3rd or 4th time someone lands here to check whether I'm dead yet. The words landed and sat there, ugly and matter-of-fact, and Osai felt something in her chest twist at the flatness of his delivery. Not rage, not grief, just information, the tone of a man reading out a routine finding. The 3rd or 4th time, Ruiz repeated slowly. You're the 6th, Marcus said and smiled, and it was the wrongness of that smile that Osai would remember longest, not cruel, not unhinged, just genuinely, warmly amused, the smile of a man greeting old colleagues at a reunion he'd been looking forward to. Welcome to Kharn. I'd offer you a tour, but you've already found most of it. Efficient team. I appreciate that in an audit. He gestured one hand, palm down, a small economical motion, and the 2 bone striders flanking the doorway peeled off, unhurried, and took up new positions, one at the perimeter gate they'd come through, one further along the wall near a second gap Os hadn't even clocked as an exit. The gesture cost him nothing. No word, no tone shift, and the massive armored creatures simply obeyed it the way a hand obeys a thought. Your Kessel started and started again, visibly trying to find the register that had served him in every negotiation of his professional life, and finding it did not fit this room. Mr. Adair, I want you to know that whatever occurred a decade ago was a failure of process, an oversight in the resettlement protocol, and the company is prepared to discuss a resolution that reflects. Dorian, Marcus said his name gently, almost kindly, the way you'd interrupt a child reciting a poem they'd gotten wrong. You reviewed a placement order for an 11-month-old infant, alone, onto a planet officially classified Class 6 uninhabitable predation risk, and you signed it in 11 minutes because you had a lunch meeting at 1. A pause, precisely timed. I know because I have the timestamp. Would you like to keep negotiating? Or would you like me to read you the rest of your calendar from that day? Kessel's mouth opened and shut without producing anything. Marcus turned, beckoning with the same small economical gesture, and started walking deeper into the compound, apparently entirely unconcerned about whether they followed, which was, Osai understood with a fresh chill, its own kind of statement. Because of course he wasn't concerned, there was nowhere for them to go that his creatures wouldn't allow. They followed. He walked them past the tally wall without comment, past the central structure with its careful chimney, out to a section of the compound Os hadn't seen yet. A wide, flat clearing ringed by low log benches, arranged with an almost domestic care, like a village green built by someone who'd only ever read about village greens in old survey manuals. Bone striders occupied the tree line all around it now 6, 7, more further back in the shadows, utterly still, utterly attentive, and Osai understood with a lurch that this wasn't a home Marcus had built for himself. It was a court, and he was giving them an audience. "You want to know how much of the compound is defensible," Marcus said, apparently to Ruiz, without turning to look at her. "Every gate has at least 2 striders posted at all times. The northern wall is weakest structurally but backs onto a ravine, so nothing large can approach it without announcing itself for 100 meters. I imagine you clocked most of that on the way in. You're good at your job." "Thanks," Ruiz said faintly, because there wasn't a version of this conversation where sarcasm felt survivable, and she seemed to have arrived at the same conclusion. "I could pay you," Kessel blurted, apparently having reassembled some fragment of his professional nerve in the walk-over, and it came out too fast, too loud in the quiet clearing, several bone striders' wedge heads turning fractionally toward the sound. "Personally. Not the company, me. Whatever this is, whatever you want, I have resources I could arrange." "How much?" Marcus asked, and there was something dangerously pleasant in his voice now, something that made Osai want to grab Kessel's arm and physically stop the sentence before it finished forming. Kessel, catastrophically, named a number, a large one, the kind of number that would have bought silence from most people most places in the galaxy. Marcus laughed. It wasn't a cruel laugh, which was somehow worse than if it had been. It was genuine, surprised, almost delighted. The laugh of a man who'd just been told a joke landing exactly where the comedian intended, and it rang strange and human and completely out of place among the silent watching creatures ringing the clearing. "That's less," he said, wiping the corner of one eye, still faintly smiling, "than what Thornville Holdings budgeted for my relocation logistics asterisk. 11 months old, Dorian. You people spent more moving me here than you're offering me now to disappear quietly." He shook his head, the amusement fatting into something colder, more precise. "I don't want your money. I have a planet. I have an army that doesn't take a cut. What I want is considerably cheaper than what you're offering, and considerably harder for you to pay." He reached into the flight jacket unhurried, no threat in the movement, which somehow made all 3 of them tense anyway, and produced something that had clearly once been a data slate, its casing long dead, repurposed now as a simple folder, its screen replaced with sanded wood bearing a list, hand-carved in the same neat, unwavering script as the tally wall. He held it out not to Kessel but to Osai, a small, deliberate choice that she understood was not an accident. "That's the placement manifest," he said. "Every name on the authorization chain. Executive sign-offs, legal review, logistics approval, security clearance for the drop team. 41 names start to finish. Everyone who touched the decision to put a baby on a Class 6 world and call it a resettlement." Osai took it with hands that weren't entirely steady and scanned down the list names she half recognized from org charts, from meeting minutes, ordinary corporate names attached to an extraordinary crime, and near the bottom 2 of them had been struck through. Not crossed out carelessly. Carved through, deliberately, the wood gouged deep enough that the strikes had their own shadow. "Those 2, Marcus said, watching her face rather than the list, clearly already knowing exactly what she'd land on, died in the last 18 months. One in a shuttle malfunction over Ceres Junction. One in what the report called a home invasion on Taeli's Prime. He let that sit for exactly as long as it needed to. Neither of those was an accident. I looked up from the list. Behind Marcus, the ring of bone striders hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound, patient as stone, and she understood with the specific, sick clarity of an auditor finally seeing the real total at the bottom of a very long column of numbers, that the 6 of them landing on Kharn today weren't the beginning of anything. "You've been off this planet before," she said. Marcus smiled again, and this time there was nothing warm in it at all. "You're not here to confirm my death," he said. "You're here because I let you be." The words landed and nobody moved, and into that silence Ruiz did the only thing her training had ever taught her to do when a plan collapsed. She went for the radio. "Ledger 7 to orbital relay," she said into her wrist comm, backing half a step toward the compound's outer wall as she did it, voice pitched low and fast. "Requesting immediate." Static, not the clean static of distance, but the flat, dead static of a channel that had been closed from the inside. She tried again, same nothing. "That's not you," Marcus said, watching her with something that might have been sympathy if it hadn't been so entirely unbothered. "That's not even me, actually, which I imagine is going to be the worst part of your day. Try the emergency band. The one that's not supposed to route through the ship's primary transmitter." Ruiz's jaw tightened, but she tried it, because that was the job, that was always the job. And this time there was a sound, a brief automated tone, followed by 3 words in a flat corporate voice that made the color drop out of Kessel's face before Os had even fully processed them. "Protocol Sunset engaged." "What?" I said very quietly, "is Protocol Sunset?" Kessel didn't answer. He didn't need to. She watched the answer arrive on his face instead, watched 10 years of legal training curdle into something that looked almost exactly like the expression Marcus must have worn once, a very long time ago, standing on a shuttle ramp, and understanding for the first time exactly what had been decided about him in a room he wasn't in. "It's a fail-safe," Marcus said gently into the silence Kessel wouldn't fill. "Built into every asset resolution shuttle Thornville sends out here. If confirmation doesn't come back clean, if the report doesn't say asterisk deceased, closed, nothing to see, the shuttle's own systems lock out external comms and quietly log the crew as lost to environmental hazard. No rescue mission. No inquiry. Just a line item." He looked at Kessel now directly, and his voice didn't rise, which somehow made it worse. "You wrote that clause, Dorian, 8 years ago. I have the draft with your revision notes in the margins." "That's not," Kessel's voice cracked down the middle. "That protocol is for asterisk catastrophic loss scenarios. It's not. It wasn't meant to be triggered on a live crew. It's a contingency. It's a kill switch for witnesses," Ruiz said flatly, lowering her wrist, her whole posture gone very still in the specific way of a soldier recalculating who the enemy actually was. "You sent us down here as asterisk disposable asterisk." "No," Kessel said, and then weaker. I wasn't told." "You wrote the clause," Marcus said again, patient as stone, and reached back into the jacket, producing the wooden manifest a second time. He didn't hand it over this time. He simply turned it, angling the surface toward the low afternoon light so the newest carving caught a shadow, fresh wood, pale against the aged grain around it, a name gouged in only recently, the cut still sharp-edged and clean. "DKSSEL." Kessel made a sound that wasn't quite a word. "I added that one 3 days before your shuttle broke atmosphere," Marcus said. "Once I confirmed the manifest for this trip, it's not personal if that helps, it's just accurate." "It's not," Ruiz said low, helping. For a long moment nobody spoke. The bone striders in the tree line hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound, but something in the quality of the silence had shifted, the specific tension of an audience waiting to see which way the scene would break. I found herself watching Marcus rather than the creatures, watching the flat, unhurried certainty in his face, and finding, to her own quiet horror, that some small, ugly part of her understood it completely. Not forgave it, understood it. There was a difference, and she wasn't sure yet which side of that line she was going to end up on. "You could let us go," she said finally. "Send the real evidence back with us. Let the truth do the work instead of—" She gestured helplessly at the ring of watching predators, at the tally wall visible through the gap in the compound behind him, at 10 years of carved, patient math. "Instead of this." "I considered that," Marcus said, and for the first time something in his voice went almost tired, almost young, a crack in 10 years of composure. "For about the first 2 years, I used to think if someone just saw just understood what happened, it would matter. Corporate accountability, public outcry, a tribunal maybe." He shook his head slowly. "Then I found out how many resettlement files like mine exist. How many other names are on other manifests, other worlds. Truth doesn't scale, Priya. Consequences do." Kessel, cornered and unraveling, tried one more time. And this attempt was worse than the money, worse than the legal jargon. A man reaching for absurdity because reason had run out. "I could offer you a board seat," he said, and even Marcus blinked at that, a flicker of genuine surprise crossing his face before the amusement came back, colder this time. "Advisory. Full transparency going forward, oversight of the resettlement division. You'd have real authority to make sure this never—" "You want to put me on the board," Marcus said slowly, "of the company that filed my death certificate 10 years early." "It would be symbolic," Kessel said, and even he seemed to hear how it sounded once it was out of his mouth. "It would be very symbolic," Marcus agreed, and didn't laugh this time, which was somehow worse than the laughing had been. It was Ruiz, in the end, who broke the standoff, not with words but with movement. A sudden shift at the tree line catching her eye, something moving low and fast between the trees on the compound's eastern edge. Not one of the pale, bone-plated shapes they'd already catalogued, but something darker, larger, with a low guttural chuff that raised the hair on Osai's arms before her conscious mind had placed the sound as a threat. Marcus's head turned a fraction, and for the first time since the door had opened, something like genuine focus replaced the composed performance he'd been giving them. The creature that broke the tree line wasn't a bone strider, or rather, it was, but older, larger, its plating gone dark with age and scarring, a ridge of jagged bone crested along its spine that none of the others had carried. It didn't approach the clearing. It stopped at the edge, half-shadowed, and made a low, rolling sound that wasn't quite a roar, more a statement, deliberate and unmistakably directed at Marcus rather than at the humans at all. "That's not one of yours," Osai said. "No," Marcus said, and something tightened in his jaw. "That's Vesa. She led the western nesting grounds before I expanded past the ravine 2 seasons ago. We've had a disagreement about territory ever since." "A disagreement," Ruiz repeated. "She thinks I've overreached." Marcus's eyes hadn't left the tree line. "She's not entirely wrong." The old matriarch chuffed again, and this time 3 more shapes resolved out of the shadow behind her, younger, leaner, but no less armored, spreading out along the tree line in a formation that even Ruiz, watching with a soldier's flat professional read, recognized instantly for what it was. "That's a flanking maneuver," she said. "Yes," Marcus said. "You're telling me," Kessel said, voice climbing toward something close to hysterical, "that in addition to the murder countdown and the kill switch protocol, we're now also in the middle of a ** territorial war between apocalypse monsters." "Not apocalypse monsters," Marcus said, and for just a moment the correction came out almost gentle, almost protective, the first crack of something that wasn't performance at all. "They're not monsters. They raised me." Vesa's group didn't charge. Not yet. They simply held the tree line, patient, spreading wider, and Osai understood with sick clarity that the compound's eastern wall, the one Marcus himself had described earlier as backing onto a ravine, structurally weakest but naturally defended, was about to be tested by something that had apparently been waiting a long time for exactly this moment. 3 unexpected humans, and a distracted Marcus in the same clearing at the same time. Options, Ruiz said, already moving, scanning the compound layout with fresh urgency, tactical instinct overriding fear now that fear had stopped being useful. Real ones. Now. Marcus's striders were already shifting position, without a visible signal from him this time. The 2 at the gate falling back toward the eastern wall, the ones deeper in the tree line beginning to circle wide, an instinctive defensive reflex that suggested, for the first time, that whatever bond existed between Marcus and his creatures ran both directions. "You 3 stay behind the center structure," Marcus said, already moving, and there was no performance left in his voice at all now, just cold, fast triage. "Vesa doesn't care about your countdown. She'll kill you as fast as she'll kill me if the wall comes down." "And if it does come down?" Osa asked, already backing toward the structure he'd indicated. Marcus didn't answer with words. He raised one hand, palm out toward the tree line, and every bone strider in the compound went still and silent at once, poised, waiting on a gesture that hadn't come yet, and somewhere behind Osai, close enough to make her flinch, one of the younger striders that had been guarding the perimeter gate shifted its bulk deliberately between her and the eastern wall, unprompted, unasked, and settled there like it had made its own decision about which side of this fight it was on. "That one's not mine either," Marcus said quietly, watching it. He sounded, for the first time since the door had opened, genuinely uncertain. "Interesting." Vesa's low rolling call came again from the tree line, closer now, and this time 3 answering calls rose from deeper in the eastern shadow, and the old matriarch's dark shape surged forward at last, breaking cover, driving straight for the weakest point in the wall Marcus had built with 10 patient years and his own 2 hands. The eastern wall didn't fall so much as give asterisk, a groan of decade-old plating buckling under Vesa's full weight, and then she was through, and the clearing that had felt like a courtroom 2 minutes earlier became something else entirely. A battlefield with no clean lines, bone-pale bodies colliding in the ash-gray dusklight, and Osai pressed flat against the central structure's wall with Kessel's shaking shoulder jammed against hers. Understanding for the first time in her life what it meant to watch violence that had no interest in whether she survived it or not. Marcus moved through it like something that had been built for exactly this. He didn't fight the way she expected, no blade, no weapon at all that she could see, just his hands, his voice, small precise gestures that redirected 6 stunned predators the way a conductor redirects a section of strings. A flat palm sent one of his own striders surging left to intercept a flanking attacker. A closed fist, held low, dropped another into a defensive crouch that took a raking blow meant for Marcus's exposed side. He wasn't commanding an army. He was speaking a language, one carved out of 10 years with no other words available to him, and watching it, Os understood with a lurch that the tally wall, the swept paths, the careful architecture, none of it had been survival in spite of the bone striders. It had been survival through them. Every notch on that height marker, every year, he'd been becoming fluent in something no interpreter would ever translate for a boardroom. "Priya!" Ruiz's shout cut through the chaos, and Osai turned in time to see one of Vesa's younger striders break past the perimeter fighting entirely, driving straight for the gap where they were pinned against the structure, and the guardian that had planted itself in front of her earlier, unasked, unprompted, met it head-on with a violence that shook the ground under her boots. She didn't decide to move. Her body simply did it, hauling Kessel sideways along the wall as the 2 creatures grappled where they'd been standing seconds before, and somewhere in the animal clarity of that moment, dodging claws the length of her forearm, Osai stopped being an auditor cataloging evidence and became, for just a few seconds, someone fighting to survive a war that had never once been about her, and found, strangely, that she didn't resent Marcus for it. She understood him. This was the only order he'd ever been given the tools to build. The fight didn't last as long as it felt like it lasted. Vesa's assault had been a raid, not a conquest, 3 younger challengers testing a boundary, an old matriarch probing for weakness rather than committing to annihilation. And once 2 of her 3 fell back, bleeding, driven off by Marcus's tighter, better coordinated pack, the old creature herself paused at the broken edge of the eastern wall, chest heaving, and looked. Osai would never be entirely sure how a creature with no visible eyes managed to convey the weight of a look directly at Marcus. He raised one hand, not in challenge, open palm still. Vesa held there a long moment, blood dark along one flank, and then, with a low guttural sound that carried something almost like grudging acknowledgement, she turned and withdrew into the tree line, her 2 surviving followers limping after her. Marcus didn't press the advantage. He let her go, watched the shadows swallow her, and only then did his shoulders drop half an inch, the first visible sign since the door had opened that any of this had cost him something. "You let her retreat," Osa said, when she could trust her voice again, picking her way across the wrecked clearing toward him. "She's led that pack for longer than I've been alive," Marcus said, not looking at her, watching the tree line where Vesa had gone. "Killing her doesn't end the disagreement. It just leaves a vacancy, and vacancies get filled by something hungrier." He glanced sideways, and something almost wry touched the corner of his mouth. "Turns out that's true of monsters and boardrooms both." Kessel was still against the wall, breathing hard, staring at his own hands like he was surprised to find them still attached, and when he finally found his voice again, it came out smaller than Osai had heard it yet. No negotiation left in it, no legal register, just a man who had run out of every tool he owned. "Please," he said, "whatever you're going to do, I have a daughter." Marcus turned to look at him properly for the first time since the fighting had ended, and the silence that followed went on long enough that Osai found herself holding her breath, bracing for something final. "So did I once," Marcus said quietly. "A mother anyway, I don't remember her. There's a line in the manifest. She petitioned against the placement order for 6 weeks before legal overruled her." His eyes didn't leave Kessel's face. "You signed the overruling memo too, Dorian. Different date, same 11 minutes. Kessel made a sound like something breaking loose inside his chest. "I'm not going to kill you here," Marcus said, and the relief that flooded Kessel's face lasted exactly as long as it took Marcus to finish the sentence. "It wouldn't matter anymore. I leaked the full manifest 4 days ago. Every name, every timestamp, every signature timed to route to 11 independent news feeds and 2 regulatory bodies, the moment this shuttle's official closure report gets filed as clean. Which it will be, because that's the only way any of you gets to leave this planet." He let that settle. Your name being struck from a piece of carved wood on a jungle floor was never going to save you, Dorian. It was never really about the wood. "Then what," Kessel whispered, "was the point of any of this? The countdown, the names, if you'd already—" "The point," Marcus said, "was making sure you understood in the time you had left to understand it, exactly what it felt like to be told your fate had already been decided by someone else, a long time ago, and there was nothing you could do about it." He said it without heat, without triumph, and that was somehow the cruelest part of all, not rage, just a debt being read back at exact, patient interest. 10 years, Dorian. I had 10 years to sit with that feeling. You get about 4 days. He turned then, toward Osai, and something in his face shifted, the performance falling away entirely for the first time, leaving something younger and more uncertain underneath it than anything he'd shown them since the door first opened. "You didn't sign anything," he said. "You weren't in the room, I checked. I filed the closure paperwork on 100 other cases I never questioned," Osai said quietly, and found she meant it. "That's its own kind of signature." He studied her for a long moment, and something passed between them that didn't need the 10,000 words it might have taken to explain. Recognition, maybe, of 2 people who'd both spent their lives inside systems built to make cruelty look like paperwork, and had each, in their own way, finally stopped looking away from what the paperwork actually did. "You could come with them," he said, "back to whatever's left of the company once this breaks, or," He glanced past her at the compound, at the tally wall, at the tree line where his creatures were already regrouping, patient and loyal and utterly indifferent to corporate law. You could stay. Kharn doesn't need saving, Priya. It never did. But I think you're tired of writing reports about things you can't fix from a desk 4 light years away. She thought about the manifest tag half buried in ash. The 2 small handprints pressed into dried mud beside claw marks that had never been walked over. 10 years of tally marks counting a countdown nobody in a boardroom had ever known was running. Yeah, she said, I think I am. Ruiz and Kessel left at dawn. The shuttle's dead comms restored the moment Marcus keyed something into a salvaged console with the same unhurried competence he brought to everything else. Protocol sunset quietly, deliberately unwound from the inside. His instructions to them were simple, delivered without ceremony at the broken edge of the eastern wall. Take the real manifest, not the sanitized one. Get it to the press yourselves in case his leak somehow failed. Don't come back. Kessel didn't look back as the ramp closed behind him. Ruiz did once and found Os, standing at the tree line beside a man built out of 10 years of grief and teeth, and didn't wave exactly, but inclined her head in something that might, in another life, have been respect. The shuttle lifted off into a sky the color of old ash, and below it the jungle drums began again. 3 beats, a pause, 3 beats, except this time. Standing among his creatures with the tally wall behind him and one name freshly carved beneath the others, Marcus Adair understood they weren't counting down to anything anymore. They were just marking the day the ledger finally started closing. Somewhere out there, 41 names are still on that wall and only 2 have been crossed off. If the leak lands like Marcus planned, a lot more people are about to find out their name was written down a long time ago. Drop a comment. Whose name do you think belongs on that wall next?